My name is Ethan Hayes, 32 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew what my life was about. Steady job as a systems engineer, a small but comfortable apartment in the city, and Melissa, the woman I was certain would someday be my wife. We met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was 24 then, vibrant and full of dreams, talking about her passion for psychology and how she wanted to finish her degree but couldn't afford it. There was something about her earnestness that night, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about helping people through therapy someday, that pulled me in like gravity. I've always been the reliable one, the guy friends call when they need help moving or advice on investments. Practical, my mum calls me, sometimes too serious, according to my younger sister. But with Melissa, I felt lighter somehow. She made me laugh in ways no one else could. 3 months into our relationship, Melissa got the acceptance letter from Westfield University's psychology program. I still remember how she cried when she showed me the email, followed immediately by the devastation in her eyes when she saw the tuition costs. "I'll defer for a year, save up," she said, trying to sound optimistic. That night, while she slept beside me, I made calculations on my phone. If I took on some consulting work on weekends and cut back on a few things, I could help her. Not all of it, but enough to make a difference. When I told her my plan the next morning, she protested at first, but I could see the hope returning to her eyes. "I'll pay you back every penny when I'm a successful therapist," she promised. I told her the only payback I wanted was to see her achieve her dreams. That was the beginning of our arrangement. I worked my regular job Monday through Friday, then took on contract projects most weekends. The extra income went straight to her tuition payments. It wasn't easy. There were weekends when I barely saw daylight, hunched over my laptop while friends were out enjoying themselves. My social life dwindled to occasional quick lunches with colleagues and rare dinners with Melissa between her study sessions. But every time she shared her excitement about a class or a professor who recognised her potential, it felt worth it. "Dr. Harrington says my research proposal is one of the most innovative he's seen from an undergraduate," she'd tell me, eyes shining. I'd feel that familiar swell of pride knowing I was helping make this possible. As the semesters passed, our relationship settled into a comfortable rhythm. She'd spend weekdays on campus and most evenings studying at the library. Weekends, when I wasn't working, we'd catch up on sleep, watch movies, or sometimes go for hikes. Simple things that didn't cost much. Money was always tight, but we managed. If Melissa seemed more distracted in our third year together, I attributed it to the increasing demands of her coursework. "Junior year is killer," she'd explain, looking exhausted. She started staying overnight at the campus more frequently, claiming late study sessions and early morning classes made the commute impractical. I missed her, but I understood. At least, I thought I did. Last spring, as Melissa approached what should have been her final year, she explained that she needed to take extra credits over the summer to graduate on time. It meant another tuition payment I hadn't budgeted for, but I made it work, took out a small loan, picked up another client. "You're the most amazing man," she told me, kissing me deeply before heading out with her overnight bag. "I don't deserve you." Looking back now, I should have heard the guilt in her voice, should have questioned why her study group always met on Friday nights, should have wondered why she never invited me to campus events anymore. But I trusted her completely. Love does that. Blinds you to what's right in front of your face. It was a Tuesday in October when everything fell apart. Melissa had mentioned a major presentation in Dr. Harrington's advanced seminar, something she'd been stressing about for weeks. I decided to surprise her with flowers and take her to dinner afterward to celebrate. I'd even splurged on reservations at that Italian place she loved near campus. I left work early, bought a bouquet of lilies, her favourite, and drove to Westfield, feeling good about giving her this small moment of joy amid all her hard work. The psychology building was an imposing brick structure on the north side of campus. I'd only been there once before during orientation, but Melissa had mentioned her seminar was in room 306. As I approached the building, checking my watch to make sure I wouldn't interrupt her presentation, I noticed a sign for a faculty reception in the atrium. Probably best to wait outside her classroom, I thought. As I climbed the stairs to the third floor, I heard familiar laughter echoing down the hallway. Melissa's distinctive laugh, the one that starts soft and builds into something musical. I smiled, following the sound, thinking her presentation must have gone well if she was laughing like that. But when I rounded the corner, I didn't find a classroom of students. Instead, I saw a small gathering of well-dressed faculty members near a refreshment table, and there was Melissa, standing close beside a tall, silver-haired man, his arm wrapped comfortably around her waist in a way that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. My feet froze to the floor as I heard him say, "I'd like you all to meet my fiancée, Melissa." The room erupted in congratulations while I stood there, flowers hanging limply at my side, trying to process what I was hearing. Fiancé? The word echoed in my head like a cruel joke. Ethan? Her voice cut through the buzz of conversation as she finally noticed me standing there. The colour drained from her face. The silver-haired man, Dr. Harrington, I presumed, looked confused, glancing between us. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice strained as she stepped away from him. I couldn't speak. 4 years of trust and sacrifice were crumbling around me, and all I could do was stand there, clutching those stupid lilies. Someone in the room cleared their throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should give them a moment," a woman suggested, but I was already backing away, shaking my head. "Ethan, wait!" Melissa called, but I was already halfway down the stairs, needing air, needing distance, needing to understand what was happening to my life. I don't remember driving home. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of betrayal and confusion. My phone buzzed repeatedly, Melissa calling, Melissa texting, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could she possibly say that would explain this? When I finally made it back to my apartment, I sat in darkness for hours, trying to piece together a puzzle that suddenly had too many extra pieces. Fiancé, the word kept repeating in my mind. How long had this been going on? How much of our relationship had been real? How much of her education had I even been funding? The questions piled up like debris after a storm. Around midnight, there was a knock at my door. I knew it was her before I opened it. Melissa stood in the hallway, mascara streaked down her face, looking smaller somehow. "Please," she whispered. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She perched on the edge of the couch, the same couch where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies, making plans, building what I thought was our future. "It's not what you think," she started, then stopped herself. "No, that's not true. It probably is exactly what you think, but it didn't start that way." According to Melissa, Dr. Harrington, Robert, had taken a special interest in her during her first semester. Mentorship turned to friendship, which evolved into something more during her second year. "I tried to end it so many times," she claimed, wiping at her tears. "But then he'd talk about my potential, about the connections he could help me make, about how we could have a life together once I graduated." "And the money?" I asked, my voice hollow. "The tuition I've been paying." Her silence was answer enough, but I pressed. "Melissa, have you even been attending classes this past year?" She looked down at her hands. "I was, at first," she said quietly, "but I dropped out last fall. Robert said he could help me get back in once things settled down." The betrayal cut deeper. Nearly a year of payments, thousands of dollars, all while I worked myself to exhaustion, thinking I was supporting her education. "Where did the money go?" I managed to ask. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Living expenses mostly. And we've been saving for a place. After his divorce is finalised." The room seemed to spin around me. "Divorce?" My laugh was bitter. "He's married." "Jesus, Melissa." She launched into explanations about his unhappy marriage, how they were separated but his wife was making the divorce difficult, how they just needed more time. Classic excuses that I couldn't believe she was repeating to me with a straight face. "Stop," I finally said, cutting her off. "Just stop. Do you even hear yourself? You've been lying to me for years, taking my money, building a relationship with a married man, and you're sitting in my apartment trying to justify it." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I loved you," I said, the past tense settling heavily between us. "I worked myself to the bone because I believed in you." "I do love you, Ethan," she insisted, tears flowing freely now. "Just not the way you deserve." The admission hung in the air like poison. "You should go," I told her, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "But I want every cent back. The money for tuition, for books, for that laptop I bought you last Christmas. All of it." She nodded, though we both knew it was unlikely I'd ever see that money again. As she gathered her purse, she paused. "I never meant to hurt you," she said softly. I didn't respond. Some betrayals are too profound for forgiveness, at least in that moment. After she left, I methodically went through the apartment. gathering her things, the extra toothbrush, the clothes in my dresser, the frame photos, and packed them into a box that I shoved into the back of my closet. Then I called my boss and requested a week off, claiming a family emergency. In a way it was. The family I thought I was building had just collapsed. The next few days passed in a blur of anger and grief. I ignored calls from Melissa and blocked her on social media. I needed space to process what had happened, to understand my own role in this deception. Had I been naive, too trusting, so desperate to be a hero that I ignored warning signs? My sister came over midweek, alarmed by my brief, cryptic text about the breakup. Jenna has always been the more intuitive one in our family, quick to read people and situations. She listened as I recounted the whole sordid story, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. "That manipulative witch," she muttered when I finished. "And that professor, taking advantage of students. He should be reported." The thought had crossed my mind, but the humiliation of explaining my situation to university officials held me back. Besides, I wasn't even sure what rules they had broken officially. Morally, ethically, absolutely. But I wasn't ready to make this public, to become a story people whispered about. "What are you going to do about the money?" Jenna asked, practical as always. I shrugged. The financial impact was significant, nearly $60,000 over 3 years. But pursuing it would mean prolonging contact with Melissa, dragging this into court, making it all even more painfully public. "Maybe it's the price I pay for being so blind," I said. Jenna shook her head fiercely. "No, don't you dare take that on. She stole from you, Ethan. She committed fraud." She was right, of course, but the energy required to fight this battle seemed beyond me at that moment. "I'll think about it," I promised, mostly to appease her. After Jenna left, I sat with a legal pad, trying to document every payment, every transfer, every cash withdrawal that had gone toward Melissa's supposed education. The evidence of my financial support was overwhelming when laid out chronologically, page after page of my hard-earned money funneled into a lie. Friday morning, I woke to an email from an unfamiliar address, sharrington@westfield.edu. Sarah Harrington, the professor's wife. "Mr. Hayes," it read, "I believe we need to talk. If you're free this afternoon, I'll be at Riverside Coffee at 2 p.m. My finger hovered over the delete button. Did I really want to involve myself further in this mess? But curiosity won out. I replied with a brief confirmation and spent the morning wondering what this woman could possibly want from me. When I arrived at the coffee shop, I spotted her immediately. Elegant, probably in her early 50s, with the kind of poised confidence that comes from weathering storms. She waved me over to her table, 2 cups already waiting. "I took the liberty," she said, gesturing to what I would discover was perfectly prepared black coffee. "Melissa mentioned your preference once, at a department function." The mention of Melissa's name opened the wound afresh. "You knew about me?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. Sarah's smile was sad. "I've known about many of you over the years," she said quietly. "Robert has a pattern. Bright, ambitious female students who need guidance, support, and eventually financial assistance." My stomach dropped. "I'm not the first." It wasn't a question. She shook her head. "No, but you may have invested the most. Robert usually moves on before things get too entangled. But Melissa..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Melissa was particularly convincing, I think, for both of you men." There was no malice in her voice, just a tired resignation. She reached into her bag and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the table. "Bank statements," she explained. "Joint accounts that Robert doesn't know I still monitor. Deposits matching the amounts you were providing for tuition, dating back 3 years. It won't get your money back, but if you decide to pursue legal action, it might help." I stared at the envelope, then back at this woman who owed me nothing, yet was offering me a path to justice. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She took a sip of her tea before answering. "Because I'm finally filing for divorce after 23 years and 6 affairs that I know of. Because I'm tired of watching him prey on people's dreams and good intentions. And because you seem like someone who deserved better." I didn't know what to say. "Thank you" seemed inadequate for this strange alliance of the betrayed. "What will you do now?" I asked instead. Sarah straightened, a new resolve in her posture. "Start over. I've accepted a position at Berkeley beginning next semester. New coast, new life." She checked her watch and gathered her things. "Consider your options carefully, Mr. Hayes. Whatever you decide, Don't let this experience make you bitter. Not everyone is Melissa or Robert. As she stood to leave, she placed a business card beside the envelope. My attorney, she explained. She specializes in cases like this, if you want to pursue it. With a final nod, Sarah Harrington walked out of the coffee shop and out of my life, leaving me with evidence of betrayal in one hand and the possibility of justice in the other. Monday morning, I returned to work with the envelope from Sarah tucked into my messenger bag. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet, but its presence was a constant reminder of decisions I needed to make. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the absence of my usual patience for office politics. My boss, Diane, called me into her office midday. You don't have to talk about it, she said, closing the door for privacy. But if you need more time off, just say the word. I appreciated her concern, but knew that solitude was the last thing I needed. Work, at least, provided structure and purpose when the rest of my life felt chaotic. I'm okay, I assured her. Personal stuff. I'm handling it. She nodded, unconvinced but respectful of my boundaries. The Mendelssohn project can wait until next week, she offered. Focus on the routine maintenance tasks for now. It was a kindness I hadn't expected, this small reprieve from my most demanding client. That evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It's Robert Harrington. We need to talk. My pulse quickened with anger. The audacity of this man, thinking I would want anything to do with him. I considered blocking the number immediately, but paused. What could he possibly have to say that would matter to me now? Curiosity, that same damnable curiosity that had led me to meet with Sarah, made me respond. There's nothing to discuss. His reply was immediate. 60K says otherwise. Meet me. One conversation. He named a bar near campus for 8 p.m. I stared at the message, rage building slowly. He was attempting to buy my silence, to protect his position at the university. The realization crystallized something in me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about accountability. I arrived at the designated bar 15 minutes late, a small act of defiance. Harrington sat in a back booth, nursing what looked like scotch, his silver hair catching the dim light. Up close, I could see what might have attracted Melissa. Distinguished features, confident posture, the aura of authority that some find irresistible. He stood as I approached, extending his hand, which I pointedly ignored as I slid into the seat across from him. Mr. Hayes, he began, his voice carrying the polished cadence of someone accustomed to lecturing. Thank you for meeting me. Can I order you a drink? I declined with a sharp shake of my head. Say what you came to say, I told him. I don't want to be here any longer than necessary. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features before he composed himself. I understand you're upset, he started, as if we were discussing a minor disagreement rather than years of deception. What happened with Melissa was complicated, but I think we can resolve this situation amicably. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a checkbook. I'm prepared to reimburse you for your financial contributions to Melissa's education. The casual way he referred to the money I'd sacrificed, taking on extra work, passing up vacations, living frugally, made my blood boil. And in return? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. Discretion. What happened was unfortunate for everyone involved, but dragging it through university channels would only cause unnecessary pain. He was worried about his career, his reputation. Melissa had been right about one thing. He wasn't divorced yet. A scandal involving a student could cost him everything. How many others? I asked abruptly. He blinked, momentarily thrown off script. Excuse me? I leaned forward. How many other students have you done this with? Sarah mentioned a pattern. At the mention of his wife's name, Harrington's composed facade cracked slightly. You've spoken with Sarah, he said flatly. It wasn't a question. She's always had a flair for the dramatic. Whatever she told you... I cut him off. She showed me bank statements, deposits matching exactly what I gave Melissa starting 3 years ago. I let that sink in. So either you're going to write a much bigger check to cover the other women you've manipulated, or we're done here. I stood, prepared to walk away. Harrington's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Don't be hasty, he hissed, abandoning pretense. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The university board respects me. My colleagues respect me. Who do you think they'll believe? A spurned boyfriend or a tenured professor with 30 years of service? I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back to his face, now flushed with anger. "Remove your hand," I said quietly, "or the next conversation I have will be with campus security, filing a report for assault." For a tense moment I thought he might escalate, but self-preservation won out. He released me, straightening his jacket. "This isn't over," he warned. I found myself laughing, a genuine laugh born of the absurdity of his threat. "Actually it is," I told him. "You can keep your hush money. I'm done being manipulated by you or Melissa." As I walked away, he called after me, "You'll regret this, Hayes." But for the first time since discovering the truth, I felt a weight lifting. The money mattered, yes, but my dignity and self-respect mattered more. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Sarah Harrington's attorney, making an appointment to discuss my options. The second was to Westfield University's Ethics Committee, requesting a meeting regarding a formal complaint. I didn't know if anything would come of either call, but taking action felt infinitely better than wallowing in betrayal. My sister was right. I didn't deserve to carry this burden alone, and they didn't deserve to escape consequences. That afternoon, Diane approached my desk with concern. "Everything all right? You seem different today." I considered the question seriously. Was I all right? No, not yet. But something had shifted. "Getting there," I answered honestly. "Just making some overdue decisions." She nodded approvingly. "Good. The Ethan I know doesn't let problems fester." She was right about that too. Before Melissa, I'd always been direct in addressing issues. Somewhere along the way, in my attempt to be supportive and understanding, I'd lost that part of myself. 2 days later, I sat across from Dean Eleanor Marshall, chair of Westfield's Ethics Committee, recounting the entire situation. I'd brought documentation, bank transfers, text messages discussing tuition payments, emails referencing classes Melissa was supposedly attending long after she'd dropped out. The dean listened intently, her expression growing more troubled as I spoke. "Mr. Hayes," she said when I finished, "I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. These are serious allegations that warrant thorough investigation." She explained the process moving forward: interviews with Dr. Harrington, possible review of his previous student interactions, examination of financial records. "I should warn you," she added, "these investigations can be lengthy and aren't always public, but I assure you we take violations of ethical conduct extremely seriously, especially when they involve exploitation of students or misuse of university resources." As I was leaving her office, Dean Marshall added one final comment. "Mr. Hayes, for what it's worth, I believe you've shown remarkable courage today. Many would have simply walked away." Her words stayed with me as I drove home, mulling over the past week's developments. Courage wasn't a quality I'd associated with myself recently. Steadiness, reliability, yes, but courage implied risk, standing up against something larger than oneself. Maybe that's what I was finally doing. That evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, Melissa stood there, looking nothing like the confident woman I'd loved for 4 years. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her usually perfect hair pulled back carelessly. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I hesitated, not wanting to reopen wounds that had just begun to heal. "I don't think that's a good idea, Melissa." She nodded as if she'd expected this response. "I understand. I wanted to tell you that I left him." The statement hung between us, heavy with unspoken expectations. Did she think this would change anything? That I would welcome her back now that she'd chosen me over Harrington? "The university is investigating," I told her instead of responding to her revelation. "I filed a formal complaint yesterday." Colour drained from her face. "You didn't," she whispered. "Ethan, do you have any idea what this will do to my academic future? To my reputation?" The familiar pattern of making herself the victim ignited a spark of anger in me. "What about my reputation?" I challenged. "What about the years I worked myself to exhaustion, funding an education you weren't even pursuing? What about the future I thought we were building together?" She had no answer for that, tears streaming silently down her face. For a moment, I felt that old instinct to comfort her, to solve her problems. I pushed it away firmly. "Whatever happens next, Melissa, is the consequence of choices you made, not mine." She wiped at her tears, nodding slowly. "I know. I never meant for any of this to happen. It started so innocently, just coffee with a professor who believed in me. Then compliments, special attention, promises about my future. Her voice trailed off. I got caught up in how it made me feel. Important. Special. I told myself the lies were temporary, just until I could figure things out. I understood the seduction of feeling special better than she knew. Wasn't that partly why I'd been so eager to support her, to be her hero, her champion? I am sorry, Ethan, she said finally. Truly. Not just because I got caught, but because I hurt someone who only ever tried to help me. It was the first genuine apology she'd offered, without excuses or deflection. I acknowledged it with a slight nod but maintained my position at the door, not inviting her inside. I should go, she said, reading my body language correctly. As she turned to leave, she added, I'm going to pay you back. I don't know how long it will take, but I will. I didn't believe her, not really, but the intention mattered in some small way. Goodbye, Melissa, I said, closing the door gently but firmly. Through the peephole, I watched her walk away, shoulders hunched against a future suddenly less certain than she planned. There was no satisfaction in her pain, only a quiet recognition that sometimes consequences are the only path to growth, for both of us. The weeks following my complaint to the ethics committee passed with surprising speed. I threw myself into work, taking on the Mendelssohn project with renewed focus that impressed even Diane. Whatever fire got lit under you, keep it burning, she commented after I presented a solution to a coding problem that had stymied our team for months. The truth was, work had become my refuge, the one area of life where effort and results had a clear, honest correlation. I started hitting the gym again, something I'd neglected during the years of weekend work and constant fatigue. Physical exertion helped channel the anger that still occasionally blindsided me, usually at night when memories of Melissa would creep in unbidden. My attorney, Rebecca Winters, Sarah Harrington's recommendation, had advised me to document everything related to my financial support of Melissa, including any new contact attempts. Civil suits are marathons, not sprints, she warned during our first meeting. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't sure, honestly. Part of me wanted to write off the money as an expensive life lesson and move forward. But another part, the part that valued justice and accountability, wasn't willing to let it go so easily. A month after filing my complaint, I received an email from Dean Marshall requesting a follow-up meeting. When I arrived at her office, she wasn't alone. A woman in a crisp pantsuit introduced herself as Janelle Rodriguez, head of University Legal Counsel. My stomach tightened. Had Harrington somehow turned this around on me? Dean Marshall must have read my concern. This isn't adversarial, Mr. Hayes. Miss Rodriguez is here because the university is prepared to offer a settlement. The word hung in the air like an unexpected gift. Rodriguez took over smoothly. Our investigation has corroborated significant portions of your complaint. Dr. Harrington has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his conduct, which will likely result in termination. She slid a folder across the desk. The university would like to offer restitution for the educational expenses you provided under fraudulent pretenses. In exchange, we ask for confidentiality regarding the specifics of this arrangement. I opened the folder to find a settlement agreement and a figure that made my breath catch. $75,000. More than I'd calculated, even accounting for interest. We've included additional compensation for the distress caused, Rodriguez explained, noting my surprise. Westfield University takes its responsibility to maintain ethical standards very seriously. What happened to you reflects poorly on our institution, and we want to make this right. I thought of Harrington's smug certainty that the university would back him over me. There was a certain poetic justice in this outcome. What about Melissa? I asked, realizing I hadn't heard her mentioned. Dean Marshall's expression softened slightly. Miss Carter is no longer affiliated with Westfield. Beyond that, I'm not at liberty to discuss her standing. I nodded, not pressing further. Whatever consequences Melissa faced, they were her journey now, not mine. After consulting briefly with Rebecca by phone, I signed the agreement. The university would wire the funds within 5 business days, and I would maintain confidentiality about the settlement details, though not about Harrington's misconduct itself. As I left the administration building, a weight I'd been carrying for weeks seemed to lift. The money wouldn't erase what happened, but it represented something crucial. Acknowledgement that I had been wronged, that my trust had been violated, that my story mattered. I texted Jenna on my way to the parking lot. You were right. I fought, and I won. Her response was immediate and filled with celebratory emojis. Never doubt the power of righteous indignation, Drinks this weekend, my treat, I smiled, feeling a genuine lightness for the first time in months. The settlement arrived exactly when promised, appearing in my account with a simple banking notification. I stared at the new balance for a long moment, contemplating what to do with it. The responsible choice would be to replenish my depleted savings, maybe make a few investments. But something else called to me, the opportunity for a fresh start, not just financially, but emotionally. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Diane and requested a meeting for the following morning. When we sat down in her office, coffee in hand, I laid out my proposal. I want to transition to remote work for 6 months, I told her. I'll maintain my current projects and client load, but I need space, new surroundings. I expected resistance, or at least extensive questions, but Diane simply studied me thoughtfully before nodding. You've more than earned some flexibility. The Mendelssohn solution alone bought you considerable goodwill. Where are you thinking of going? The question made me smile because the answer had come to me with unexpected clarity the night before. Everywhere. Nowhere specific. I've spent 4 years putting my life on hold for someone else's future. I think it's time I explored what I want. We worked out the logistics, secure VPN setups, scheduled check-ins, protocols for client meetings. Technology made remote work entirely feasible for my role, and my track record gave Diane confidence in my reliability. 6 months, she agreed, with the option to re-evaluate at the 3-month mark. Just don't go anywhere without decent Wi-Fi. It was more support than I dared hope for. Another reminder that not everyone in my life would betray my trust. 3 weeks later, I'd sublet my apartment, packed the essentials into my car, and set up automatic payments for the few remaining bills. My first destination was a small coastal town in Oregon, where a college friend had a guest house he rarely used. Stay as long as you want, he offered when I called. The place sits empty most of the year anyway. On my last night in the city, Jenna and a few close friends gathered for a send-off dinner. There were toasts and good-natured jokes about my eat, pray, code journey, but underneath the humour was genuine support. To Ethan, my friend Mike said, raising his glass, who turned lemons into a road trip with occasional Wi-Fi. Everyone laughed, but Jenna added more seriously, to my brother, who remembered his own worth when others forgot it. Her words stayed with me as I drove west the next morning, watching the familiar cityscape fade in my rearview mirror. The Oregon coast welcomed me with dramatic cliffs and misty mornings. I set up my workstation in the guest house's small sunroom, where the sound of distant waves provided a soothing backdrop to code reviews and client calls. Colleagues barely noticed the change in my location, though a few commented on the improved quality of my video backgrounds. Beats your apartment wall, Mike joked during a team meeting. In the evenings and weekends, I explored tide pools, hiked coastal trails, and gradually settled into a rhythm that felt both productive and healing. The constant, restless anger that had driven me in the aftermath of Melissa's betrayal began to recede, replaced by something quieter, a cautious optimism about what might come next. 2 months into my coastal stay, I received an unexpected email from Sarah Harrington. Thought you might want to know, she wrote. Robert's termination is now official and public. The faculty newsletter announced it this morning, citing violations of ethical conduct policies without specifics, small victories. She'd attached a link to the newsletter, and seeing the formal acknowledgement of Harrington's misconduct brought a strange mix of vindication and closure. I drafted several responses before settling on a simple, "Thank you for letting me know. Hope Barkley is treating you well." Her reply came the next day. Fresh starts all around, accompanied by a photo of a sun-drenched campus walkway. There was something fitting about this brief exchange with another survivor of Harrington's deceptions. We hadn't become friends exactly, but there was a connection in our parallel journeys towards rebuilding. As my time in Oregon drew to a close, I found myself contemplating my next destination with genuine excitement, rather than the numb urgency that had driven my departure from the city. I'd originally planned to head south to California, but a project opportunity changed my trajectory. We need someone on site in Denver for the Rivera implementation, Diane explained during our weekly check-in. 2 weeks, maybe 3. You're the best person for it, but I understand if it doesn't fit your wandering schedule. I smiled at her choice of words. Actually, I've never spent much time in Colorado. Could be interesting. The chance to combine work travel with my personal journey appealed to me, another step in reclaiming my professional identity separate from the years of sacrifice for Melissa. As I packed up the guest house and thanked my friend for his generosity, I realised I was looking forward to the change of scenery, to new challenges, to whatever came next. For the first time in months, the future felt like an open road rather than a burden to shoulder, and I was finally ready to see where it might lead. Denver greeted me with crisp mountain air and unexpectedly blue skies. The Rivera project was complex, implementing a new security system for a financial services firm with stringent compliance requirements, but the challenge energized me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The client team was impressed by my solutions, and Diane was effusive in her feedback. "They're asking if you can extend another week," she told me during a video call. "Apparently, you speak executive better than our usual engineers." I laughed at that. Years of explaining technical concepts to Melissa, who had no interest in my field but occasionally needed to understand my work schedule, had honed my ability to translate complexity into accessibility. Another unexpected gift from a relationship I was still learning to recontextualize rather than simply regret. I agreed to the extension, settling into a comfortable routine in the downtown apartment the company had arranged. Weekends became opportunities for exploration, a drive up to Rocky Mountain National Park, local breweries, a jazz club that reminded me how long it had been since I'd made space for simple pleasures. One Saturday evening, as I was enjoying dinner at a small restaurant near my temporary home, the hostess seated a woman at the adjacent table. Something about her quiet confidence as she ordered a glass of wine and opened a book caught my attention. When she glanced up and caught me watching, I expected the usual polite but dismissive smile that strangers exchange in cities. Instead, she raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Sorry," I said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "You reminded me of someone for a moment." It wasn't true, but it seemed less awkward than admitting I'd been staring because she was the first person in months who had sparked even a flicker of interest. "Must be someone impressive," she replied, with a hint of amusement. "You were looking at me like I might have the answer to a very complicated question." Her directness was disarming. "Maya Reyes," she added, introducing herself before I could fumble through a response. "Ethan Hayes," I replied, extending my hand across the small gap between our tables. "And no, I don't know any complicated questions at the moment, just enjoying a rare night out." We fell into easy conversation after that, about Denver, about the book she was reading, about the unusual art installation visible through the restaurant window. I learned she was an environmental lawyer originally from New Mexico, in town for a series of meetings with state officials. There was something refreshing about talking to someone who knew nothing about my recent past, who had no preconceptions about who I was or what I'd been through. When the restaurant began closing, I surprised myself by asking if she'd like to continue our conversation over coffee somewhere nearby. Her thoughtful pause made me immediately regret the impulse. Of course she wouldn't want to extend an evening with a stranger she'd met by chance, but then she nodded. "There's a decent place around the corner, but I should warn you, I'm leaving town on Tuesday." The time frame was perfect, I thought. No pressure, no expectations, just the simple pleasure of intelligent company. The coffee shop was quiet, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. We claimed a small table near the window, and I found myself sharing more than I'd planned. My nomadic work arrangement, my coastal stay in Oregon, even vague references to ending a long relationship that had prompted my journey. Maya listened attentively, offering her own story of rebuilding after a divorce 3 years earlier. "The hardest part wasn't losing him," she confided, warming her hands around her mug. "It was losing my idea of what my life was supposed to look like. We had this whole plan, the careers, the house in the suburbs, even the timing of when we'd start a family. When that fell apart, I had to figure out what I actually wanted, not what fit the script I thought I was following." Her words resonated deeply. Hadn't I been following a script too? The supportive boyfriend, the shared future plans, the selfless provider, roles I'd embraced so completely that I'd lost sight of my own desires along the way. "How did you figure it out?" I asked. Maya smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I tried things. Some worked, some didn't. I moved to a new city, took cases I wasn't sure I could win, went on terrible dates, learned to rock climb very badly. The point wasn't to find the perfect new path right away. It was to remember that I could choose my path at all." We exchanged numbers at the end of the evening, though neither of us made specific plans to meet again. "If you're ever in Santa Fe," she offered, "or if I find myself wherever your wanderings take you next." It wasn't a promise or a commitment, just an acknowledgement of a connection worth preserving. As I walked back to my apartment, I realised I hadn't thought about Melissa once during those hours with Maya. The revelation wasn't that I was ready to date again. I wasn't, not really, but that I was capable of being fully present in a moment without the shadow of betrayal darkening every interaction. It was another kind of healing, unexpected, but welcome. My Denver assignment stretched into a full month, and as it concluded, I found myself at another crossroads. Diane had emailed about a potential long-term client in Seattle who specifically requested me after hearing about my work on the Rivera project. It would mean settling in one place for at least 6 months, she warned, knowing my current preference for mobility. But it's a significant opportunity, both financially and career-wise. I took a weekend to consider the offer, driving up into the mountains where cell service disappeared, and the only sounds were wind through pines and distant water. The solitude clarified my thinking. The past 5 months of travel had served their purpose, giving me space to process, to rediscover parts of myself that had been subsumed in my relationship with Melissa, to rebuild confidence in my own judgment. But I was beginning to crave stability again. Not the same constraints I'd lived under before, but a home base from which to operate. I called Diane on Monday morning and accepted the Seattle position with one condition. I want 2 weeks before I start. There's somewhere I need to go first. She agreed easily, confident in my commitment to the project despite the delay. That afternoon, I booked a flight back to the city where everything had begun and ended with Melissa. Not to see her, we'd had no contact since our final conversation at my door, but to properly close that chapter of my life. I'd left in such a hurry, transitioning from anger to escape without the deliberate closure I now realised I needed. My sublet agreement on the apartment was ending anyway. It was time to decide whether to renew or to truly move on. The city welcomed me with familiar sights and sounds that felt both comforting and distant, like revisiting a place from childhood that hasn't changed but somehow seems smaller. I stayed at the hotel downtown rather than returning to the apartment immediately, wanting to approach these final days with intention rather than falling back into old patterns. On my second morning back, I met Jenna for breakfast at our favourite diner. "You look good," she observed, studying me across the table. Less hunched. I laughed at her characteristic bluntness. "Thanks, I think. The fresh air and distance helped." She nodded, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "So Seattle next? That's practically a grown-up decision, putting down roots again." There was no judgment in her tone, just sisterly awareness of my process. "Semi-permanent roots," I corrected. "A year, maybe 2. Long enough to see what it feels like to build something new." After breakfast, I drove to the apartment I'd called home for 6 years. The last 4 shared intermittently with Melissa. The property manager met me with paperwork. Final inspection, key return, security deposit processing. "We've already had interest in the unit," she mentioned as we walked through the empty rooms. "Great location for young professionals." I nodded, remembering my excitement when I'd first signed the lease, how I'd gradually filled the space with carefully chosen furniture and artwork, how easily Melissa had integrated her presence with a toothbrush here, a favourite mug there, until it felt like our home rather than just mine. Now it was neither, just walls and windows waiting for the next occupant's story to unfold. I signed the final documents, handed over the keys, and walked out without looking back. Another threshold crossed, another tie severed cleanly. My last evening in the city, I met up with Mike and a few other friends for dinner. They were curious about Seattle, about the new project, about whether I'd met anyone interesting during my travels. I shared stories about the Oregon coast, the Denver mountains, even mentioned Maya briefly without elaboration. What struck me most was how easy it felt to be with these people who had known me before, during, and after Melissa, how their constancy provided a through line in my life that had nothing to do with romantic relationships. "To new beginnings," Mike toasted as we finished dinner, "and to old friends who stick around for all the chapters," I added, raising my glass in return. The sentiment wasn't profound or original, but it was deeply true. My journey forward wouldn't be defined by who I loved or who had hurt me, but by the full tapestry of connections and experiences I chose to cultivate. The following morning, as my flight to Seattle boarded, I scrolled through my phone and paused at Maya's contact information. On impulse, I sent a brief message. Seattle bound for a new project. If environmental law ever brings you to the Pacific Northwest. I didn't expect an immediate response, or any response necessarily, but the act of reaching out felt right. Not a declaration or a request, just an open door that might lead somewhere or nowhere. As the plane taxied toward the runway, I switched my phone to airplane mode and settled back in my seat. 6 months ago, I had stood in a university hallway with flowers hanging limply at my side, watching my carefully constructed future crumble. Today, I was choosing a new direction, not because circumstances forced me, but because I recognized my own agency in crafting a life worth living. The betrayal would always be part of my story. The years of sacrifice, the manipulation, the painful awakening to truth. But it would not be the defining chapter, merely one among many that shaped but did not limit who I was becoming. As the plane lifted into the clouds, I thought about what Melissa had inadvertently taught me, that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with careful attention, that boundaries were not selfish but necessary, that my worth was not measured by what I could provide to others but by my own internal compass. These were hard-earned lessons, paid for at a price I would never have chosen to pay. But as the city receded beneath me and new horizons opened ahead, I found myself strangely grateful for the journey, not for the deception itself, but for the strength I'd discovered in its aftermath. The future was unwritten, uncertain but full of possibility, and for the first time in years it belonged entirely to me.